Hello friends. Tonight we'll step into a world where love isn't written in ink, but in blood, gunpowder, and unhealed scars. These aren't romantic tales with white dresses and scented candles, but brutal love stories where people kill, betray, dig graves, or hang the ones they love. And if you think you know what love is, after these 32 chapters, you'll have to redefine your entire heart. Before you lean back comfortably, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly enjoy the content I share. And leave a comment, letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's fascinating to see people following from all over the world. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some background noise, and let's dive into tonight's journey together. Do you think Love in the Wild West is a ballad sung between sunset and hoofbeats? That there's a cowboy on a white horse, tossing his hat, embracing a girl in a lace dress waiting amidst the dust? No, not at all. In the Wild West, love doesn't come with white horses. It might start with a glance in a saloon, reeking of urine and dried blood, a punch thrown over a misunderstanding, a night spent together to fend off the cold, or simply because, within a 100-mile radius, only two people of the opposite sex are still alive. The West has no time for love letters, no flowers, no white wedding dresses. Here, people love by survival instinct, and sometimes because there's no other choice. A kiss in a stable might mean a lifetime together. A man might call a woman wife just because he slept with her twice and gave her a gun for protection. No one asks, "Do you love me?" because in the West, surviving until tomorrow is enough. If anything resembles love, it's mixed with the smell of gunpowder, the sound of gunfire, blood seeping through a shirt, and a fleeting touch of hands after escaping an ambush. People kiss in the dark and part ways in the light of a gallows. They remember each other through a forgotten handkerchief, a tin cup with a name scratched on it, or footprints by the hearth. And they love knowing that, come morning, they might have to collect the other's body in a stinking sack. So if you've ever dreamed of a cowboy romance, sorry, you've come to the wrong place. The West has no fairy tale love. It only has brief glances, long nights, sudden deaths, and tenderness as rough as a cattleman's calloused hands. And sometimes, just sometimes, amidst that chaos, two people find each other, not because of fate, but because in this hell, they still want to touch something warm. But that fragile warmth rarely lasts long. In the West, everything is measured in livestock, land, and bullets, even marriage. People don't marry for a fluttering heart. They marry for cattle, for someone to boil water, tend the fire, or guard the stable. A 17-year-old girl might be wed because her father lost a poker game, or because her mother saw the neighbor's high fence and needed a place to send her daughter to ease her worries. In a world where the living barely outnumber the dead, marriage isn't the result of love, it's a bargain to coexist. In some places, women are priced by weight. Whoever can carry a sack of corn as heavy as her can marry her. In others, a man brings 3 cows and an old saddle to propose. If rejected, he fires a shot into the sky and walks away. No one finds it strange. Here, people don't propose under the moonlight. They stand in the market, at an auction, or in a saloon. A nod is enough. The first kiss often comes months after the wedding, and only if both are still alive. Women in the West have no choice, but they aren't weak. Many accept a short, old, cowardly man, as long as he has a gun and can shoot. Some are married off 3 times, their husbands dying from snakes, malaria, or bandits. They're called lucky widows because they're still alive. Men fare no better. Some marry just to avoid sleeping alone in winter. Others choose a woman mocked by the whole town simply because she can sharpen a knife and knows when to stay silent. In the West, love is a luxury, but surviving a season of scarce food is practical. So, a wedding happens quickly, simply, with no music, no guests, no cake, just a witness and a gun tucked at the hip. Ceremonies sometimes take place right after a trial, because the groom is about to be hanged. Some women marry a man who just escaped death, because he survived. He might protect me. Others marry a prostitute, because she's the only one who can cook porridge without burning the pot. These marriages sound like jokes, but to them, they're everything. In a world where the line between life and death is as thin as a blade, even the frailest bond becomes sacred. A husband might beat his wife, curse her, leave for months, but if anyone else touches her, he'll shoot. A wife might sleep with another, but when her husband is shot, she's the one stitching his wounds, and pulling out blood with a red-hot needle. They don't call it love. But it's truer than any ballad. Many children are born in leaky tents, wrapped in burlap, growing up amidst the smell of livestock and arguments. They don't know white dresses, wedding flowers, or gold rings, but they know where their father goes at sunset and where their mother hides her knife. Once, an 8-year-old girl asked her mother why she married her father. The mother just smiled and said, "Because he had a horse and listened when I got mad." Marriage in the West isn't sweet, but it's real. It's forged from rotten wood, old whiskey, nights trembling together, and groans of pain after an ambush. They don't promise to love forever. They only promise that if one dies, they'll bury the other nearby, if there's open ground. And the saddest part is, most don't keep that promise. The West isn't patient with romance. It only has dusty roads, the smell of gunpowder, names misspelled on makeshift wooden graves. But in the moment, two people walk out of a stagecoach stop, holding hands without looking at each other. There's still something that touches what might be called almost love. And perhaps, in that distortion, that nameless feeling is truer than any wedding with a priest and violins. Because in the West, marriage needs no decoration. It just needs to exist. And sometimes, it starts with things worse than an unromantic proposal, a bet, a drunken night, and an uncleaned pigsty. They call it a wedding night, but it's more like a registered accident than a sacred event. At a small stop called Mud Hollow, a wedding took place that no one remembers the exact date of. They only recall it started with a bet in a saloon. Whoever won that card game would marry the blonde waitress with a skirt so short, the preacher turned away when she passed. The winner was a drifter cowboy with crooked teeth and patchy beard, named Jeb or Jake or John. No one was sure. The girl didn't cry or scream. She just looked at the man and said one thing: "If you don't beat me tonight, I won't leave tomorrow." They married that afternoon, outside the saloon, under a rotting awning. The witnesses were a drunk and a blind dog. No wedding dress, just the skirt every man's hand had touched at least once. No ring, just a leather cord tied around her wrist. When it started to rain, they sought shelter, not in an inn, because he'd gambled away all his money. Only the pigsty behind the checkpoint, once used for sick livestock, remained. They climbed over the broken wooden fence, pushed aside the rotting straw, and called it their wedding night. No candles, just the smell of damp mold, the faint grunting of pigs somewhere, and the cold cutting through their wet shirts. He didn't kiss her, or say he loved her. She didn't cry or smile, just shivered. After a few silent minutes, she pulled her shirt over her shoulders, looked at the sky, and asked, "If I die of fever tomorrow, will you bury me?" He nodded. Then they slept side by side, not embracing, not speaking, not dreaming. The next morning before dawn, he left to find work as a hired hand, while she sat in a puddle of urine, picking straw from her hair. They didn't see each other for 3 days. When he returned, he brought a piece of jerky and a patched blanket. She smiled, not out of joy, but because she was still alive. That was their wedding night. No roses, just straw, scratches, and 2 exhausted bodies, touching not out of passion, but for warmth. No one wrote letters about it. No one sang songs about it. But 30 years later, people saw them sitting side by side at the station's door, eyes dim, hair grey, still silent. The man said they once fought so hard, she hit him with a shovel. The woman said he once left for a year, without a word. But they stayed. No one knew why. Maybe habit. Maybe no one else could stand the other's sweat. But perhaps because they started in a pigsty, and nothing after that was ever as bad as that night. If you asked if they loved each other, they wouldn't answer. But every time it rained, they sat closer, as if rotting straw and mud still lingered in their memories. Because in the West, love isn't something you recount dreamily. It's something you survive together, endure together, and if you're lucky, grow old together. Even if it started in a doorless sty, a lost bet, and a sleepy question in a rainy night. Because in the West, as long as you're alive, anything can be a beginning, even love, even for those who were never allowed to name that feeling, like her. The woman sitting by the second-floor window of the Red Lantern Saloon, short skirt, smudged lipstick, holding a cheap whiskey glass, but always watching the dusty road leading into town. Her name was Lainey, or at least that's what regulars called her. Her real name. She couldn't remember the last time anyone used it. Lainey had worked at the Red Lantern for 6 years. She no longer counted customers, felt embarrassed, or hoped someone would keep her longer than a night. But then a man appeared, not the first to look at her differently from the rest, but the only one who never entered her room. He sat at the corner table, drank exactly 3 whiskeys, spoke to no one, and always left before midnight. He had a dirty hat, a worn leather coat, and a scar running from his neck to his ear. They called him Cole, a gunslinger, who once killed 2 men in a fight over smoked sausage. He wasn't romantic. No flowers, no flirting, no asking her price. He just looked at her, a look that said more than his mouth ever bothered to. Yet she started writing him letters. Letters never sent. She hid them in an empty ammo box under her bed, along with 3 coins, a silver button, and a handkerchief with dried blood. The first letter had 1 line. You look at me like I'm still human. The second was longer, about the time she nearly froze to death on a wagon at 14. And so, each time he visited, she wrote another, recording things no one ever asked her. She wrote about her left leg aching in the cold, the stew recipe she learned from her grandmother, her real name, Eleanor. No one knew, not even Cole. He just drank, looked at her, and left. And she, each time he stepped out the door, wrote a few more lines. Crooked, whiskey-stained words, sometimes blurred by tears, sometimes scratched out for being too honest. Once, she almost gave him a letter, but instead, she handed him a coin for change. He kept it. The next time, he placed it back on the table, along with a spent bullet. Neither said anything. But from then on, each visit, he left something on the table. A scrap of cloth for patching, a button, a small map, as if they were talking through silent things. Until one day, he stopped coming. A week, then 2, then 3. She still sat by the window, still wore lipstick, still worked, but wrote less. Not because she had nothing to say, but because there was no one left to imagine reading it. On the 25th night without him, she went downstairs, took the letterbox, and burned each one, page by page, line by line. The fire blazed in the old stove, reflecting in her dry eyes. She didn't cry, just sat, watching the paper burn until ashes covered the wooden floor. That day, a new customer arrived. He carried a worn leather bag and an old gun. Before going to her room, he asked, "Is there a girl here named Eleanor?" She froze for a moment, then smiled, shaking her head. "No, just Lani here." She led him upstairs, as always, as if there had never been letters, as if no one had ever looked at her without paying a dime. That night, while he slept, she slipped a crumpled paper from his bag, her own words from the 13th letter. She didn't know how it got to him, didn't want to know. She folded it, tucked it into her blouse, and returned to the window. From there, she watched the dusty road leading out of town, and she started writing another letter, this time for no one to read, no ammo box to hide it in, no hope of a reply. But she wrote, because if she didn't, she'd forget she was once Eleanor. And in the West, once you forget your real name, you're just a shadow standing by a window, waiting for someone who won't return. But some women don't wait. They don't write letters. They don't whisper names in the night. They love differently, like Daisy loved Boone, directly raw, with nothing to regret. Boone was a bounty hunter, the kind who walked into town dragging a bloody sack behind him, with eyes like he'd seen too many deaths to still know fear. He wasn't handsome, gentle, or polite, but he survived. And in a land where survival is the highest standard of attraction, that was enough for Daisy to feel safe sleeping beside him. They met when she was scrubbing blood off the saloon floor, blood from a customer who grabbed her skirt without asking. Boone shot him without a word, then handed her a cloth to wipe her hands. She didn't thank him, just nodded and kept scrubbing. That night, he slept with her, not out of desire, but because he was wounded in the shoulder and needed someone to stitch it. She didn't ask questions, just washed the blood, bit the thread, and cut his shirt with one hand while the other held a gun ready on the table. From then on, he kept coming back. No schedule, no warning, sometimes a week, sometimes a month, but always when she just started to forget him. And each time he brought a sack with someone dead inside and a new wound. They didn't talk much. He slept. She stayed awake. In the morning, she set breakfast on the table. He left before sunrise. Once, she asked, "Have you ever loved anyone?" He didn't look at her, just said, "Love? I once hesitated a shot, because of a dog. Close enough." She laughed. not because it was funny, but because she expected nothing more from a man who lived by shooting others in the head. Slowly, she learned to recognize his footsteps outside, the smell of gunpowder on his sleeves, the sound of his gun hitting the wooden table. She never knew where he came from, never saw him smile, but each time he left, she folded the blanket tighter, scrubbed the blood off the floor, as if erasing traces of something close to love. One night, he woke up screaming, sweating, eyes wide like he was hanging upside down. She sat beside him, not comforting, not asking, just sat. By morning, he said nothing about it, just left a bullet on the table and walked away. She kept that bullet, along with the grey hair she found on his coat once, and once, an old photo fell from his pocket, a young woman with eyes eerily like hers. She didn't ask, he didn't explain, and life went on, silent, simple, bleeding, and surviving. Until that winter, when Boone didn't return, Daisy didn't wait. But whenever a new customer entered the saloon, she looked closely, searching for tired eyes, a scar on the wrist, the heavy gait of a man who carried more deaths than promises. A month later, a sheriff stopped by, placing a paper with Boone's name on the table. He'd been shot dead by another bounty hunter, one after a bigger reward, Western justice. The sheriff shrugged. Daisy didn't cry. She went to her room, opened the drawer, took out the bullet, the photo, the grey hair, and threw them into the fire. That night, she lay in the dark, hand still gripping the gun under her pillow as she did when he stayed. But this time, the gun wasn't warm. The next morning, when customers called her down, she said she was off today. No reason given, just one sentence. No one came to shoot me for loving him, but no one came to keep me either. And she kept living, serving, smiling, counting tips, avoiding the eyes of drunken men. But each night, before sleeping, she touched the empty spot where he once lay, not to remember, but to ensure no one had replaced it. In the West, loving a bounty hunter isn't a story worth telling. It has no happy ending, just blood, darkness, and sometimes a flicker of warmth in a moment when the world wants to kill or abandon you. But Daisy didn't need others to understand. To her, loving him was like stitching a wound, painful, dirty, and if you're not careful, you'll die of infection. But you do it, because if you don't, the blood never stops flowing. And so she lived on. Women like Daisy don't wait for miracles. They wait for the saloon to open, for new customers to walk in, and sometimes for a look that doesn't scorn them. On one such evening, when whiskey overflowed and every story turned foolish, a man walked in, his posture bent like the wind had twisted his spine. His name was Travis. At least that's what he said that night. Unshaven beard, crooked hat, torn leather coat, and eyes sunken like he'd never slept a full night. He went straight to the bar, ordered a whiskey, then turned to Daisy wiping a table in the corner. "Do you believe in love at first sight?" he asked, voice hoarse and tired, like someone escaping himself. She didn't answer. She'd heard that line 100 times, from 100 mouths, each with a different stench. But he didn't laugh or joke. He just pulled a gun from his pocket, placed it on the table, light as if offering a promise. "I don't have a ring, no horse either, but this gun is mine, truly, and I've never given it to anyone." The saloon fell silent. Everyone looked at him, then at Daisy. She looked at the gun, not because it was valuable, but because he'd placed it on the table, like a man laying down his heart, unguarded. "If you keep it, you keep me too," he added, not blinking. She didn't laugh or refuse, just quietly wiped her hands on her apron, picked up the gun, and tucked it into her skirt's waistband, as if it had always belonged there. The saloon roared back to life, but from that moment, people called her the wife of the fool who proposed with a gun. Travis had nothing, no house, no cattle, no land, but he had strange stories about sleeping among wolves, stealing rope from a hangman's cart, a scar on his neck he called, a parting gift from an old lover, a prison matron. Daisy didn't believe them all, but she listened because he told them not to boast, but as if he just needed someone to remember them after he died. They didn't have a wedding, no witnesses. She just gave him Boone's old shirt, unwashed, and he gave her his second gun, the spare, the one usually hidden at his ankle. From then on, they lived as husband and wife, eating together, sleeping together, dodging bullets together, running when needed. Travis never asked about her past, and she never asked about the needle marks on his hands. or the scar stitched by someone who didn't know how to hold a needle. Once, she saw him cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just tears falling as he washed his hands. She didn't ask, just placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You're not the first I loved, but if you don't leave, you might be the last." He nodded, then kissed her, not the kiss of a man who'd known many women, but of one who'd lost everything and was trying to believe this time would be different. They lived together, a year. No one died, no one left. Just close calls, almost caught, almost exposed, almost shooting each other over a misunderstanding. But after each near death, they needed each other more. Once, she was wounded, a long gash across her stomach. Travis carried her 3 days through rain, seeking medicine, a hiding place. He didn't sleep, didn't eat, just held her hand and whispered nonsense. She woke after 3 days of fever. Her first words, "The gun I kept, is it still there?" He laughed for the first time, a strange, crooked smile, but so real she had to look away. That winter, they kept a fire burning all night in a makeshift shack. Wind whistled through wooden cracks. The smell of smoke mixed with the smell of them. He told her about a time he wanted to be a preacher. She told him about the first time she saw snow. No promises were made. But that night, they placed their guns side by side, like two souls tired of fighting. The next morning, when he woke, she was writing something on tobacco wrapping paper. He asked, "What's that?" She replied, "If you die before me, I'll tell people you proposed in a saloon with a gun." He laughed, then nodded. "And if you die before me?" he asked. She looked up, straight, "Take the gun back." And they said no more. Because in this world, if you love enough to give someone your gun, that's all that needs saying. No ring, no music, no priest, just a silent proposal, amid cheap whiskey, creaking chairs and eyes, no longer daring to believe in happiness, but still daring to offer a gun. And in the West, when people love with guns, they also get jealous with guns. No poetry, no sulking, no tears, just a glance held too long, and a shot loud enough to shake the wooden floor. Like the night the cold whiskey saloon fell dead silent because of a bullet through the back of a man who'd just turned to look at a girl at the next table. The shooter was Martha, red hair, face powder so thick no one knew her real skin color, who once declared, "I don't own anyone, but no one gets to look at him longer than I allow." The dead man was Eli, Martha's lover, a sharp card player with a tongue sweet as candy, but eyes that never knew when to stop wandering. They came to town together, laughing, arm in arm, sharing a cigarette, robbing a German trader, and getting kicked out of 3 other saloons for loud arguments. But that night, Eli made the biggest mistake of his life. He glanced at another girl, just a second, a fleeting look, maybe unconscious, maybe just reflex. But it was enough for Martha to set her drink down, pull the small derringer hidden in her stocking, and shoot. No one had time to scream. No one had time to stop her. Eli slumped, face down on the table, blood soaking the cards he held. Martha didn't run. She stood there, wiped her lips with a handkerchief, and sat by his body, as if waiting for the main course to be served. The sheriff came, asked questions, took notes, witnesses confirmed, but no one dared say they saw her draw the gun, not out of fear, but because they all understood this wasn't murder, this was an emotional reflex, a Western reflex, where love always carries the risk of death. Martha was held for 1 night, then released. Rumor had it, the sheriff had slept with her once, or at least came close. She returned to the saloon, ordered the same old whiskey, sat in the same old chair, and no one dared ask her anything. But strangely, after that, no one saw her sleep with anyone again. Some said she was crazy. Some said she was waiting for Eli to return. Others whispered she kept his body in her room, preserved in salt and whiskey. No one dared check. She still lived in the 2nd floor room. Every night, she sat by the window, stroking the now polished gun, not for protection, but as if holding a memory. One day, a stranger sat in Eli's chair. She said nothing, just looked. He understood, got up and left. No one tried a second time. She wasn't as beautiful as before, nor young, but something in her eyes made every man slow down when passing her, not from fear of death, but from fear of being loved like that. The kind of love where a wrong glance earns a bullet. Once, a new girl asked, "Do you regret it?" shooting him. Martha didn't answer right away. She stared into her whiskey, then said, "Regret? No, I only wish I'd shot him sooner, before I loved him." The girl left town that night, and Martha stayed, every day, as if guarding a place where love once existed, the kind of love that can't be written into poems, but can be carved into bullet casings. And if you walk into Cold Whiskey on a rainy night, you'll still see the empty chair beside Martha, and an untouched glass of whiskey on the table, maybe for Eli, maybe to remind the town, here loving the wrong person, or glancing the wrong way, can get you killed. And Martha, she never left that town. Once, she told the barkeep, "If anyone asks, say he died because he loved me, and I live because I can't love anyone else." In the West, love doesn't need to be long. Just one well-timed bullet is enough to etch someone's name into your heart, in a way no one can erase. And if anyone asks what love is here, just point to Martha and say love is when you're ready to kill someone and still wait for them to come back. But not everyone has a gun, and not everyone gets to be jealous or keep the one they love with a bullet. Some loves only exist in the dark, behind a thin curtain stained with sweat, cheap whiskey, and cheaper perfume. Like the love between Ruth, a prostitute, and Preacher Thomas. They kissed behind the brothel's curtain like two sinners, because that's what they were, because there, love wasn't allowed to be named. Thomas came to town with a Bible, a wooden cross, and the eyes of someone who once believed in salvation. He preached on Sunday mornings, handed out bread on Tuesday afternoons, and prayed through stormy nights. Everyone thought he was the most righteous man within 300 miles, but no one knew. Every Thursday evening, when the streets emptied, he slipped through the back door of Delilah's brothel. He didn't go upstairs. He went straight to room number 3, where Ruth waited behind an old velvet curtain. They didn't sleep together, didn't undress, didn't do what people thought was sinful. They just sat side by side, held hands, and after a few whispers, he leaned down to kiss her, gently, slowly, as if touching a part of her soul he didn't dare face directly. Ruth never asked for money. She said, "I take money from every other man, but not from the only one who looks at me without lust." He didn't reply, just squeezed her hand tighter. They did this for 8 months. No one knew, no one suspected, because who would believe a preacher would enter a brothel just to hold a woman's hand who'd slept with the whole town? But then the rumor leaked. A drunk hiding behind the stairs saw them. One Sunday evening, as Thomas read a Bible verse about purity, a voice shouted, "Ask Ruth if his hands are clean." The church erupted in chaos. Pious wives jeered, husbands who'd paid Ruth blushed and looked down. Thomas didn't deny it. He said only one thing, "If love is a sin, I bear it willingly." He was expelled from the congregation the next day. No one saw him in church again, but Ruth still sat behind that curtain, in room number 3, at the same hour, for 3 weeks straight. She didn't cry, just stayed silent. So then, on the 4th week he came. No preacher's robe, no cross, just an ordinary man, standing before her, head bowed, whispering, "When don't have to hide anymore." But she didn't smile. She shook her head. Hiding was easier than living openly. "Are you sure you can handle their stares?" He nodded, then kissed her. For the first time, they kissed without a curtain, without darkness, without running. The next morning, they left town. No one knew where. Some said they started a horse ranch in Colorado. Others said he returned to preaching, and she posed as his cousin. But Delilah, the brothel madam, sometimes said, "I saw real love once, just once, behind curtain number 3. She kissed him, like the world wasn't pure enough to witness it." Women like Ruth didn't need weddings, and men like Thomas only needed a hand that didn't pull away in the dark to feel a miracle. In the West, where right and wrong blur in gunpowder and dust, some loves have no marriage, no title, no acknowledgement, but they're truer than anything written in a church ledger. And sometimes, just one kiss behind a thin curtain is enough to live a whole life. Because not all love needs light. Many loves in this West are born from darkness, from hiding, from moments when people have nothing left to lose, except their own loneliness. Like the story of widow Lydia and the horse thief named Sam. Lydia lived alone on the northern edge of Dry Creek. Her husband, a blacksmith, died in a forge explosion when she was barely past 30. They had no children, no kin, He left her a 3-room wooden house, an empty cattle shed, and 2 calloused hands that once held each other every winter night. After his death, Lydia stopped going to market. She grew her own vegetables, tended her own chickens, even nailed boards when the roof leaked. Townsfolk called her distant, strange, the widow who talks to the dark every night, but no one bothered her. Until one night, when she found her stable door open. Nothing was stolen, but there were unfamiliar footprints and a small bloodstain by the fence. She didn't scream, didn't call the sheriff. She went home, lit a lamp, cooked an extra bowl of soup, set it on the table, and waited. At midnight, the door creaked open. A man stepped in, hat pulled low, coat caked in mud, shoulder bleeding. She didn't ask who he was, just pointed to a chair. He sat, ate, said nothing. When he passed out at the table, she bandaged his wound, took off his boots, and left a cup of water by the bed. The next morning, he was gone. But the next night, he returned, bringing a piece of dried deer hide. And so, they met every night. No one gave a reason. No one asked names. Lydia called him, the man with sad eyes. He called her the woman who isn't afraid. Through winter, they shared a bed, not for love, at least not at first, but for warmth. But then Lydia noticed she was cooking extra portions. He started hauling firewood for her. Once, she said, "I don't know what you do out there, and I don't care." He stayed silent, then replied, "I steal horses, because I don't know how to do anything else." She nodded. No scolding, no panic, just a reminder. Don't steal from old folks. They have nothing to lose. He smiled, the first smile she'd ever seen. They lived like that for 3 months, outside the law, outside all norms. But those were the months Lydia felt truly alive. He read books she borrowed from town. She learned to disarm bullets. One night, he brought her a saddle engraved, with an L. He said, "No horse carries this name. I took it, because it's like yours." She didn't answer. But that night, she placed her hand on his chest as he slept, not to check a wound, but because she feared she'd lose the chance. Then he vanished. No warning, no note. Lydia didn't search, didn't cry, just woke earlier each morning, staring at footprints in the dirt. A week later, a courier left a small note at her door. "I might not be the man for you to keep, but if I survive this winter, I'll return with a real horse this time." She folded the note, placed it in the wooden box where her wedding ring once sat, and kept living, not hoping, not despairing. But every night, the wind rattled the roof. She lit an extra lamp for someone out there, running, to know a house was still open. In the West, they say, loving a thief is handing yourself to loss. But Lydia knew, sometimes, the only loss is not opening the door to that first knock. And sometimes, those living outside the law are the only ones who know when to stay silent. Like Sam, who never said "I love you," but always brought enough firewood to last the cold. And sometimes, that's all a woman in the West needs. Firewood, a hot bowl of soup, and a wordless promise. But not everyone gets that. Many wait forever for someone who never returns. Like Evelyn, the young woman by the old post station, who sat on her porch every morning, holding a letter she'd never know was real or not. Evelyn married at 19. Her husband, Luke, was one of the first young men to volunteer for the front lines against the Apache tribes. He promised to return before winter, promised a silver bracelet from the natives as a keepsake, and promised to write every week. But winter came and went. No letters, no bracelet, no Luke. She asked the command post and got a shrug, and the words, "maybe missing, maybe captured, maybe dead," not clear. Evelyn didn't believe it. She waited, sat on the porch every day, leaving a lamp lit all night. She believed if Luke was alive, he'd find that light. Then one March day, while washing clothes by the creek, she received a letter. The courier was a young soldier, hands trembling slightly. The letter was tied with twine, paper crumpled, handwriting scrawled. The first line read, "Evelyn, if you're reading this, I didn't make it back in time." She sank to the ground, hands shaking. She thought it was from Luke. But by the fourth line, the writer signed as Jeremiah, Luke's squadmate. He wrote that Luke was wounded in a raid. Not badly, but it got infected, and he died after 3 days of fever. Before dying, Luke couldn't write. Jeremiah wrote for him. He described Luke's eyes when he spoke of her, recalling her hair, her patched dress, the way she folded a handkerchief. He didn't cry, just squeezed my hand and said, "If I don't make it, tell her I loved her in my way." At the end, Jeremiah added, "If it's not a bother, I'd like to write to you sometimes." Evelyn held the letter, reading it over and over for a week. She didn't know who Jeremiah was, what he looked like, but his words felt like someone sitting in her heart, knowing every crack. So she wrote back, short, just a few lines, asking if he was cold, eating enough, missing home. She hid the letter in a hard envelope, sent it to the camp address on the first letter. A month later, she got a reply. Then every month letters came. No flirting, no promises, just two people, one in the wilderness, one at a small post station, talking about weather, war, and things no one else cared to hear. Then the war ended. Jeremiah didn't return right away. He wrote that someone needed care, a young soldier who lost a leg. She understood, waited more. In the 8th month, he appeared, thinner than she'd imagined, darker, but his eyes were as the letters described, deep, calm, sad. They stood silent for minutes. Then he held out a silver bracelet, exactly what Luke had promised. Evelyn didn't cry, just slipped it onto her left wrist. Then she cooked a meal, the stew she'd mentioned in her 3rd letter. Jeremiah ate every bite. That night, he slept in the front room, she in the bedroom. The next morning, he rose early, watered the horse. She watched from behind the door, his straight back, thin shoulders, but something steady. And in that moment, she knew Luke was truly gone, and Jeremiah was the one she'd needed for so long. Not to replace, but to continue. They didn't marry, didn't change names, but lived as husband and wife, Western style, sharing a bed, firewood, well water. Every morning, Evelyn sat on the porch, holding an old letter, a habit. The only difference was, now the man who wrote it sat beside her. And in this harsh West, love isn't always finding the one you lost, but finding someone willing to pick up those pieces and write the rest. But not everyone has someone to sit with on the porch. Not everyone has letters to read or bracelets to wear. In a place like the West, where death is as familiar as a rooster's crow, some loves are buried before they can even be named. And every winter, those loves quietly stir, without greeting, without farewell, never claimed by anyone. Every November, at the southern edge of Dakota, a wooden camp appears in the forest, near the mountain's base, unmarked on any map. Locals call it Winter Station. Each year, women from all over arrive, young widows, former prostitutes, maids cast out by employers, women carrying sorrows no one bothers to ask about. No one registers, no one checks. They just know, if they arrive at the right time, there's always an empty bed, a smoldering hearth, and a blanket thick enough to forget the snow outside. And so they come. No one asks names. No one shares their past. They just live side by side for the 3 coldest months, like shadows seeking shelter, like souls not yet at rest. But there, between pine sap-soaked walls and the wind whistling through door cracks, love, the kind no one dares name, begins to creep in. A young girl, new to the station, once nearly beaten to death by a husband who suspected betrayal, was too scared to look at anyone. But that night, another woman, grey-haired, who'd lived with 3 men all dead from disease, quietly sat beside her, handed her a bowl of soup, and held her hand as they slept. No explanation, no reason, and from that night, they lay beside each other. Not to love in the way the world understands, but to know there was still some warmth that didn't demand a price. Some traveled 100 miles just to touch another's skin without fear of being hit. Some brought old love letters, read them to the person beside them, then burned them, just once. On Christmas Eve, they didn't sing carols. They sat in a circle, sharing forbidden stories. One spoke of her first rape, another of a child who never got a name. Some said nothing, just wept when a hand touched their shoulder. Love at Winter Station isn't lasting, isn't beautiful, doesn't promise, but it's real. In the way they share a burnt piece of bread, in the glances when the fire dies, in sitting closer without a word. One night, 2 women vanished from the station. No one asked where. The next morning they returned, hand in hand, eyes red, clothes muddy. One left a note with 4 words. "We are still alive." That was all. Spring came, the station dissolved. Some returned to towns, some to husbands, Some had nowhere to go, wandering to another station. But strangely though they left, they never forgot Winter Station. Not for anyone special, but because for the first time they existed without judgment. The next year, winter returned, and the station rose again. Year after year, nameless loves bloomed in the snow, brief, silent, but enough to warm a fractured soul. Evelyn, the one who waited for letters, once passed by. She didn't stay, but left a cloth bundle, embroidered with Jeremiah, and some biscuits. A small note read, "I found love, don't stop looking, sisters." No one knew who wrote it, but each year, someone new read it. In the West, love isn't always between men and women. It isn't always kisses, weddings, or children. Sometimes, it's just permission to breathe beside another, through the cold, and sometimes, that's enough to keep living. Because in the West, surviving is a declaration, and loving someone, even in silence, even by touching hands in the coldest part of the year, is a victory over cruelty. But some loves are born not just to survive, but to defy boundaries, laws, and blood, like the love between Ayana, an Apache girl, and the first white man who kissed her without making her feel disgust. His name was Reed, son of a gun-trading rancher. He'd followed his father through war zones, seen white men aim rifles at native children, and call it pacification. Reed wasn't like his father. He read books, knew Apache words, and on a trip deep into forbidden land, he was captured. They didn't kill him, because Ayana said no. She saw him reading when caught, jotting down an elder's song from her village. She was curious. He was scared, but didn't run. Ayana, daughter of the village shaman, wasn't allowed to laugh loudly, step over a dead man's shadow, or love a white man, but she liked hearing him talk. His voice wasn't loud, wasn't harsh. When he mispronounced an Apache word, she laughed. The first time she laughed in front of a man. For 3 weeks as a captive, they didn't touch. But they talked about war, about blood, about why white men never stopped. Then, one night, under a moon dim as smoke, Ayana entered his tent. No knife, no shaman's daughter's face. Just a girl, flesh and bone, curious and trembling. He didn't touch her, just sat up, looked. She sat beside him, placed a hand on his lips, and said, "I want to know what a white man's kiss tastes like." He leaned down, slowly, carefully, as if her lips might break, and they kissed. Not rushed, not greedy, not rough like she'd heard. After that kiss, Ayana left without a word. The next morning, he was gone. Not because he escaped, but because her father found out. The tribe didn't kill him, but didn't leave her in peace. She was banished, no longer a daughter, no longer a voice of her ancestors. She became homeless, but she didn't cry, just walked toward the sunset, where he'd said his family had a small trading post. 6 months later, in an Arizona border market, a brown-skinned woman stared at a man selling horses. He was older, thinner, but his lips were the same. They didn't embrace, didn't cry, just sat together, ate from the same bowl of beans, and that night, slept under the same makeshift awning. They lived together for 2 seasons. Each night, she taught him an Apache word. Each morning, he taught her to write her name in English. No one married anyone, but in town, they were called the mixed-skin couple. A man once insulted her, called her a savage girl between 2 worlds. Reed beat him until his teeth broke, then held her all night, as if her heartache could be drawn out through her shirt. But life didn't let them last. One evening, while he fixed a fence, a group of masked men shot up the trading post. He took a bullet for her, in the gut. She didn't scream, didn't cry, just held his head in her lap, whispering prayers in a tongue no one taught her anymore. He died in her arms, eyes open, lips moving with words she never heard. She didn't bury him in a cemetery. She burned his body, scattered the ashes across the prairie, where they'd kissed a second time. Each year, she returned on that day, sat on an old rock, placed a blooming cactus on the ground. Locals feared her, called her the ghost of the horse trader who died young, but she didn't care, because only she remembered how soft his lips were, what he whispered behind the blade of a border, and only she knew one white man had kissed not to possess, but to hold a soul being torn in two. In the West, people fear love that crosses boundaries, but because of that, when it exists, however brief, however unacknowledged, it burns brighter than the fire that consumes the one you love. And then, when the fire dies and only ashes remain, some keep living in silence, carrying kisses that are never called love. In the West, love is rarely spoken aloud. It exists in unnoticed gestures, in fleeting glances, and in touches no one dares mention again. At a small stagecoach stop called Willow Creek, where the train comes only 3 times a week, there was a woman named May. She wasn't strikingly beautiful, not a prostitute, nor anyone's wife. Just a woman who served coffee in the morning, mended chairs at noon, and dusted the counter at dusk. But everyone who passed through remembered her eyes, grey like ashes, falling from stories that never took shape. May had kissed many men, but none were her lovers. Some were weary travelers, some soldiers heading to war, some outlaws seeking refuge. They all stopped, stayed, then left. She didn't hold anyone back, didn't keep any promises, but with every goodbye, she kissed them, slowly, gently, as if giving them something they didn't know they needed. No one asked why she did it. No one dared ask if it hurt her. But the old folks at the stop said that every time she bid someone farewell with a kiss, it rained the next morning, as if the sky knew something had left that no one dared name. Once, a wandering musician stopped by, poor, with a worn-out guitar, and a voice sad like wind through an abandoned church. He and May slept together for 5 nights. No one at the stop was surprised, but what they remembered was, for the first time, the next morning, May didn't send him off with a kiss. She just stood watching. As he boarded the train, she turned away. It didn't rain that day. Everyone knew something had changed. A week later, he sent a single letter. It read, "I know you kiss everyone, but thank you for not kissing me. Because of that, I'm still alive with the hope you'll wait for me to return." He never returned. May pinned the letter behind the coffee counter, covered by a cloth, but the cleaner saw it and told others. From then on, May kissed people as before, but always avoided their lips, kissing only foreheads, cheeks or fingers, as if saving something final for the one who never came back. Someone once teased, "Have you ever loved anyone?" She smiled. "I loved a man who wouldn't let me kiss him." They didn't understand, but an old woman in the corner nodded. She'd lived long enough to know, some kisses weigh more than a lifetime. Another woman, once the sheriff's wife who later ran off with a fur trader, said May kissed her too, after she learned of her betrayal. "That kiss made me cry, not for love, but because it was the first time I felt comforted by someone who didn't matter to me." And that was May, a woman whose birthday no one remembered, whose age no one knew, but who left a piece of herself in everyone's memories. Kisses that were never declarations of love, but enough to keep people going when they had nothing left to hold on to. Once, a migrant couple's child was left at the stop. May cared for him 3 weeks until his parents returned. When they came, she didn't scold, didn't speak, just kissed the boy's forehead and turned away. The boy didn't cry, but 20 years later, as a grown man, he returned to the stop, walked to the old coffee counter, placed a flower on it, and whispered, "Thank you for my first kiss." May was gone by then. She died one undocumented autumn, found leaning against the wooden chair behind the counter, eyes closed, lips slightly curved, as if she'd just sent someone off. In her hand was a note. "Don't call me a lover. I'm just someone who kisses when others stop believing in themselves." In the West, people remember gunslingers, outlaws, lovers who wield guns and spill blood, but sometimes, the deepest wounds are left by those who never held anyone back, never asked for anything, only gave a kiss, then quietly retreated. Kisses never called love, but lingering like memories of someone who touched your heart without hurting it. And in a place like the West, that's rarer than gold. Because when kindness loses value, when love isn't trusted, people start guarding their hearts with the most extreme measures. And love, if not handled right, can become something more terrifying than hate. Like the story of Delilah, the only woman in Montana who was so jealous, she dug up her old lover's grave. Delilah was no stranger in Windrock. Everyone knew her. Black hair, brown eyes, a voice that could sober a drunk just to keep listening. She'd been a dancer, then a saloon owner, then the wife of 3 men. One died of smallpox, one of gambling, and one, no one knew if he died or fled. But the one she loved most, deepest, was a poor musician named Silas. He came to town that summer, with a worn guitar and a smile that smoothed the wrinkles from a woman's wounded face. Silas wasn't handsome, rich, or a sharpshooter, but he listened, and he wrote love songs for Delilah that no one else ever heard. They lived together nearly 2 years, until he fell ill, and died on a rainy night. She buried him under a cypress tree behind the saloon, carving his name into a headstone with the apple-peeling knife he used. The funeral had no one but her and a stray cat. From then on, once a month, she sat by his grave, talking, smoking, sometimes sleeping on the cold ground. Then a new man came to town, younger than Silas, handsomer, named Bennett. He didn't play music, but he fixed roofs, cooked, and most importantly, loved Delilah in a way that made others believe he was sincere. And maybe he was. She began to forget Silas, or so she thought, until one afternoon, as Bennett held her hand past the cemetery, he blurted, "Why do you keep looking at that grave? An old lover." She nodded, joking, old love, still there, like a ghost. But he didn't laugh. He stayed silent the rest of the way. That night, he didn't sleep beside her. The next morning, she woke to find Bennett gone. The door was open, rain fell, and a note on the table read, "If you still hold him in your heart, bury him deeper." She ran to the cemetery, leaving the saloon behind. Silas's grave was dug up, the coffin opened, the body gone. Only the headstone and a silver necklace, the one Silas gave her when they were together, remained. She stood frozen, didn't cry, didn't scream, just returned home, locked the door, sat in the middle of the room, watching the rain. 3 days later, the sheriff found Bennett at the town's edge, burning a large fire in the woods, beside Silas's half-charred body. Bennett didn't run, wasn't mad. He only said, "I wanted her to be free. I wanted the dead to stop taking the living's bed." The town was shaken. They called it a crime of love. Bennett was locked up, but no one dared approach Delilah. She didn't leave her house for 3 months, didn't open the saloon, didn't speak. People thought she was broken. But one autumn morning, she stepped out, red dress, hair pinned high, eyes no longer sad. She reopened the saloon, set a whiskey glass on the table, and when a customer asked, "You okay?" she just smiled. "Silas is gone, for good now. And Bennett, he loved me in a way no one should ever love again." From then on, she never visited the cemetery, never spoke Silas's name again. But every month she placed a new silver necklace on the saloon table, as if reminding someone, love, if not let go in time, can turn a good person into a grave digger. In the West, people kill for land, cattle, honor, but few admit they kill for love. Bennett did. He didn't regret it. And Delilah, who'd been serenaded, held, loved with chilling jealousy, kept living, smiling, mixing drinks, as if love hadn't made her a widow of both the dead and the living. And if you visit that saloon on a winter night, you might hear Delilah laugh. But don't be foolish enough to ask about Silas, and never mention Bennett, because some loves should stay in the ashes. Dig them up, and everything rots. In the West, some loves should only be kept in darkness, in silence, or buried under 3 layers of cold earth. But sometimes, people lack the strength to speak, the courage to hold, or the ability to let go, so they wrap their feelings into objects. Something small, rough, that fits in a pocket, tucked inside a shirt, carried like a silent secret. Like how a girl named Rosalie sent her heart in a bullet pouch. Rosalie was the only daughter of the blacksmith in Bridger's End. She grew up amid hammer strikes, burning coal, and men's curses. No one thought she'd have any softness. But Rosalie was different. Her eyes were the color of wet ash after rain. Not bright, not dim, just deep, like someone dropped something precious into their depths. She loved a boy named Ellis, a soldier, not a brave cavalryman or a fearless gunslinger, just a messenger, mocked as the pigeon runner. But Rosalie loved him for that, because he didn't like shooting or killing, because he once told her, "I just want to deliver letters. Everyone deserves news." She smiled at that, and started writing letters. Each time he set out, she gave him one short, simple, no words of love, just reminders of apple pie smell, the cold weather, or the coat he forgot. Once, Ellis was wounded, crossing a pass in a blizzard. He survived, but lost 2 fingers on his right hand. He returned, unable to ride or write. She said nothing, just brought him a small canvas pouch, sewn from burlap, lined with a blurred letter she'd written. "What's this?" he asked. She replied, "Bullets won't keep you alive anymore. Keep this, to remember you have somewhere to come back to." From then on, he carried the pouch by his chest, under thick layers. He said, "If something hits my heart, it'll have to go through this first." Each time he left, he didn't ask her to wait. She didn't promise to, but each time he returned, she gave him a new scrap of paper to slip into the old pouch, like replacing blood in a body running dry. Then one day, he didn't return. No letter, no news. Just an old soldier who came back, handing her a broken gun and the crumpled, blood-soaked pouch, half-stained. No one knew how he died, only that his body wasn't found. Rosalie opened the pouch, finding not just her paper but a new one, in shaky, crooked writing. "I'm not sure I'll survive, but if you get this pouch, know, I tried to keep you by my heart until the end." She folded the note, sewed the pouch shut, and tied it around her neck, like a pendant. From then on, she never married. Not because she waited, but because no one else made her want to write another note. Each morning, she worked at her father's forge, face smudged, hands calloused. But those who looked closely saw the faded cord at her neck, and on rainy nights, she sometimes touched it, as if checking if her heart still beat. Someone asked, "Why not leave it on an altar? Let him rest." Rosalie replied, "He carried me by his heart when he died. I'll carry him by mine, while I live." No one asked again. And from then on, when young soldiers passed through town, they heard the tale. If you want to know what love is, go to the forge, find the girl with a bullet pouch tied to her heart. Rosalie didn't share her story, but each time she finished forging iron, she touched her neck. Once, a shy young soldier asked to borrow a hammer. She gave it, then said, "Hold tight to what's worth living for, because death is always lurking." He didn't understand, but nodded. Later, they said he survived an ambush, because a bullet missed, deflected by the hammer he carried. He wrote to thank Rosalie. She didn't reply, just tucked his letter in a drawer, beside her old notes. In the West, where every word of love can be cut by a gunshot, where hearts beat not for poetry, but for the hoofbeats chasing behind, sometimes what protects you isn't a gun, but a crumpled canvas pouch, holding words someone whispered in ink and longing. And if you asked Rosalie if love was real, she wouldn't answer. She'd just touch her neck, where her heart beat slowest, and smile, because she knew some loves need no vows, no rings, no graves, with two names. In the West, love doesn't need to be eternal, just true in the moment it exists. But out there are also women who wore wedding dresses. No one named them for afterward. Brides without marriage papers, unrecorded in church ledgers, leaving no wedding photos, only dust on their dress hems and tears, in strange beds. They were called mail-order brides. It began with ads in the back of local papers, where frontier men, living amid sandhills and dried blood, with long beards and lonely hearts, posted for wives. Seeking woman, 18-35, can cook, sew, not afraid of horses or blood, will be cared for, land sufficient, wooden house with roof. Many answered, not for love, but to escape, from stepfathers, from brothels, from cities crumbling under hunger. They boarded trains, clutching a stranger's letter, wearing straw hats and worn shoes. At their destination, they were met with appraising stares. Some were lucky, met kind men. Others were dragged onto wagons like late deliveries. These brides weren't asked, "Do you take this man?" They were asked, "How much do you weigh? Can you stoke a wood stove? Can you carry 6 chickens from the coop?" After the wedding, they became wives, mothers, servants. No one used their birth names. Some were called Wife 3, others just the girl, and so they lived. No one knew their names, but they knew every horse in the stable, every callus on their palms, every time they were hit, then held, every afternoon by the stove, forgetting the date. Some fled, some died in the woods, chased, some vanished in floods, but some stayed, not for love, but for children. No one else would teach to tie shoes. Once, a young woman named Margaret, a former teacher, left Kansas for Wyoming, after a farmer named Jeb's letter. They'd never met, but his letter was short and kind. "I'm not good with words, but I'm lonely. If you come, I won't make you plow. I just need someone waiting when I come home each evening." Margaret arrived.
Knew Jeb wasn't handsome.
Didn't talk much. As his letter said, they married in the backyard, with 2 chickens as witnesses. No music, no photographs. But that night, as Margaret brushed her hair, Jeb approached, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said, "Thank you for coming. You can keep your name. I won't make you change it." She turned, didn't cry, just took his hand, led him to the bedroom, where a creaky bed was the most romantic thing in their lives. Years later, Margaret died of malaria. Jeb carved her name on a stone, her real name, without his surname. Below it he etched, "She didn't come for love, but she taught me how to live like a man worth loving." Women like Margaret were one of thousands of brides without real weddings, but they lit lamps to wait, boiled eggs for husbands returning, mended torn sleeves without asking whose blood stained them. In the West, small graves dot the empty plains, nameless, unmarked, with only a bundle of wildflowers and a tied handkerchief. That's where these unnamed brides rest. They're not in history books, but in every brick of a crumbling wooden house, every potato patch, every drop of sweat. They're there, living, dying, leaving a resilience no one dares call love, but certainly isn't surrender. And if you pass an old town, see someone dusting a doorframe, or hear a child call mother in a strange voice, know a nameless bride might still be there. They don't need their names remembered, only that someone lives because of what they quietly preserved. But there are those who, their whole lives, hold on to nothing except a blurred memory, a fleeting warmth in the dark, a kiss without a face. In the West, where people sleep fast, live fast, die fast, not everyone gets to love fully. Some loves are just a night of shelter in a stable, a single touch of lips, when no one dares ask names, and then a lifetime carrying that feeling like an unverified secret. On a scorched grass hill in northern Wyoming, there's a small stone hut called the Overnight Station. Once a lookout for passing cattle drivers, it became a refuge for those caught in blizzards. No one stays long, but one winter, it became the nameless memory of two people. The first was Lark, a girl thin as a stick, lost from a migrant caravan, stumbling into the hut nearly frozen to death. The second, no one knew his name. He arrived half a day later, hand wounded, face wrapped in a scarf. Neither had strength to leave. They asked no questions. They just shared firewood, watery soup, and a tattered blanket. The first night, no one spoke. The second night, she handed him a potato. He peeled it for her with his left hand. The third night, wind howled, snow battered the hut's walls. She curled up, shivering. He wrapped his arm around her. Then they kissed. No prelude, no sighs, just the survival instinct of two drifters in a freezing world. The next morning, he left, leaving her a leather pouch of medicine and a scrawled note on a plank. "You'll live." She woke, touched her lips, but couldn't recall his face, only that his hands were cold and his breath smelled of pine. She did live. A cattle crew saved her 3 days later, but for the rest of her life, though she married, had children, moved to a brick house in Missouri, Lark never kissed anyone without closing her eyes, because she feared opening them would reveal it wasn't him. Every year, on the first snowfall, she packed a small pouch of medicine and placed it by her doorstep. When her daughter asked what it was, she only said, "For the man who saved me with a kiss." No one understood, but everyone saw. Something unexplained lingered in her eyes. She wasn't sad, didn't wait, just lived, as if part of her stayed in that old stone hut. Years later, past 60, a stranger came to town, an old man, blind in one eye, limping, asking for the northern hills. They led him to Lark's house. No one else alive knew the way. As he entered, Lark was brewing tea. She turned, looked at him long, then whispered, "Does your breath still smell of pine?" He smiled, crooked, like he'd known much pain. "I'm not sure, but I once kissed a girl in a stone hut and forgot to ask her name." They didn't embrace, and didn't cry, just drank tea, two old people sharing stories. When he stood to leave, Lark gave him a new pouch of medicine, like the one from years ago. "This time, I remember your face," she said. He nodded and left. She died the next spring. On her windowsill, they found a trembling note. "Sometimes, love needs no name, no face, just knowing you were held through the cold, long enough to keep living." In the West, where people are forgotten, like wind-blown hay, nameless, faceless kisses endure the longest. They need no confirmation, only that the one who received them remembers enough for their heart to stir when the first snow falls. And maybe that's the strangest love, the kind that keeps you alive, even if you can't recall what the one you loved looked like. Because in the West, it's not faces, names, or sworn vows that make love. Sometimes, It's just one person surviving, and another quietly vanishing, leaving something no one sees, no one knows, but everyone feels. Like wildflowers, by nameless graves, quiet, steady, blooming each year, as if someone still remembers. Behind the abandoned cemetery in Dawson's Drift, there's a low patch of land, rarely visited, with no headstones, no fences, just 12 small mounds scattered under an old elm. Locals call it the silent plot. No one knows who's buried there, no records, no ledgers, but strangely, every spring, each mound blooms with one kind of flower, 12 kinds, never the same, never fading together. Sunflowers, asters, lavender, even red blooming cactus. No one plants them, no one waters, yet they grow, and rumors began. Someone, year after year, tends them in silence. The first to notice was an old woman named Alma, who tended the cemetery before going blind. She said, at 15 she saw a strange woman, face wrapped in a scarf, quietly visiting the plot each day, digging, planting seeds, vanishing before sunrise. When Alma asked, "Who's buried there?" the woman only said, "People who loved but no one remembers." Alma never saw her again, but the flowers kept blooming, even in barren soil. Even when ice lingered, people began to believe it's where unfinished loves are buried. Girls who died heading to husbands, wives unclaimed in plagues, cowboys shot on the way home with no one to send their bodies to. Once, a couple lost in a blizzard slept behind the cemetery. In the morning, they found lavender sprigs on their chests, dewy but intact. No one approached them that night. They left town at dawn, silent. Then an orphan boy from the stagecoach stop played in the silent plot. He pulled weeds around the mounds, not for spirits, but because he liked the flowers. One afternoon, he tripped, cut his forehead. His foster mother asked how he got hurt. He said, "I tripped on a name no one reads." That night, a woman went to the plot, lantern in hand, searching for names. She found none, only a fresh yellow daisy, blooming, clean, as if placed that afternoon. The story spread. No one disturbed the plot anymore. No one touched the flowers. When they planned a storm fence, the town leader ordered, "Avoid the silent plot. Someone's loving there." The phrase became legend. And since then, when someone lost a love but didn't know where to bury them, they'd sneak to the plot, leaving a seed in a small cloth bag between two mounds. If it bloomed the next year, they believed the message was received. Once, a young widow from elsewhere came with a sack of ashes. No place to put them. The cemetery refused. No papers. That night, she went to the silent plot, dug lightly, scattered the ashes, and planted a rosemary sprig. The next year, white flowers bloomed there. And from then on, she stayed in Dawson's Drift, teaching, writing poetry, never leaving. Some said she buried her husband. Others said a lover, who died in another's arms. No one dared ask. One spring, the flowers didn't bloom. 12 mounds stood bare. People feared the sower was dead. But on the last afternoon of April, a 6-year-old girl, playing, stuck a bunch of wildflowers in the ground. The next day, the flowers bloomed, all 12 kinds, for the first time together, as if someone flipped an emotional switch in the earth. From then on, townsfolk began placing real flowers on the nameless mounds, not to replace, but to say, "We know you loved, and we still remember." And so the flowers kept growing, kept living, like the hearts of people no one recalls, but who still have something unrested. In the West, where bodies can be dragged off by dogs if unburied, where graves are sometimes just a stone propped up, there's one place where nameless loves are tended with flowers, silence, and respect for memories never allowed to be spoken. And if you see flowers blooming where no one lives, know a love once existed, deep enough, real enough to outlast forgetting. The wildflowers by nameless graves are the final proof that love doesn't need a face, a hand to hold, or a paper to prove it. And in a place like the West, where people live by instinct and die for a half-second's hesitation, love can be born from just a scent, a lingering breath on a forehead cloth, a sweat stain on a saddle, a moment standing close, hearts beating off rhythm, without ever looking into each other's eyes. Like the story of Clara and the blacksmith, she never met face to face. Clara lived above the tailor shop. Her mother left her. She sewed, laundered, fixed clothes for the town, living quietly, unnoticed, except when someone needed a rush job. Her shop sat above a forge. Every morning, hammer strikes echoed up, metal on metal, the wind through the door cracks, carrying the smell of sweat and warm ash. She'd never seen the blacksmith. They said his name was Joel, big, quiet, with a crooked shoulder from a horse's kick. Clara didn't care, until one day, his sweat, a sharp, smoky mix of forge and roasted sheepskin, lingered in her sleep, making her dream she stood in a furnace with her heart pounding like a hammer. She started finding reasons to go downstairs, delivering mended coats, asking to fix a hook, borrowing a nail. He never looked up, just nodded, handed things over, took payment, went back to work. But Clara noticed, each time she entered, the hammer slowed, as if he was sniffing the air, instead of focusing on hot iron. One afternoon, she forgot her handkerchief. The next morning, it was neatly folded, hung on the horse tie outside. It carried a smell, his sweat, and a hint of burnt wood. She kept it by her bed, didn't wash it. From then on, she wrote small notes, tucked in her sleeve, dropped each time she visited the forge. No names, just lines of poetry, vague questions. Do you think sweat holds memories? Ever swing a hammer and hear your heart match it? He didn't answer, but each time she returned, he responded with actions. Once, she dropped a note saying, "I like your smell better than the lavender my mother grew." The next morning, a sweat-soaked leather scrap, carefully rolled, sat on her doorstep, a reply. She hid it in her desk. That night, she slept without nightmares. So they exchanged feelings through things no one understood. A metal shard with fingerprints, a sweat-drenched handkerchief, a breath lingering on a button. No one saw each other's face. No one knew true names, but they knew exactly how their bodies reacted when seasons changed. Once, Clara fell ill. She didn't go to the forge for 3 days. On the fourth morning, 3 sharp knocks came. She opened the door. No one, just a bottle of ginger water and a warm cloth for her forehead. His old sweat enveloped it. She wept. It was the closest she'd ever come to love. Then winter came. The forge closed. He was gone. No one said why. Some said Joel left to find a lost brother. Others said he was injured in a stable fire. Clara didn't ask. She just opened her window each morning, letting the wind blow in, hoping it carried his lingering scent from the bricks. She didn't search, not because she didn't want to, but because their love never needed faces. It lived in ambiguity, in skin's memory, in quiet tremors when standing wordlessly near. Each year, she sewed a man's coat, his size, and hung it by the wooden stairs, like a ritual. When asked, she smiled. So, he knows the way back. But he didn't return, and she never loved again. No one touched her, because they didn't have that smell of ash, sweat, and breath in the heat of iron afternoons. At the end of her life, Clara died at her sewing chair. Her hand clutched a leather scrap, old, faded, but still holding that smell. No one understood why she lived like that. No husband, no children, no dates. But the cleaner found a wooden box under the floor. Inside were dozens of notes, handkerchiefs, buttons, ropes, all marked with sweat and fingerprints. On the lid, in her handwriting, "I never saw your face, but I knew you better than myself." In the West, love doesn't need smiles or first glances. Sometimes, it just needs a smell, the scent of someone who makes you tremble without a touch. And in this dusty world, that might be the only way to love without losing anything. Because a smell, no one can make you give back. But if you give your heart and let someone weigh it against poverty's measure, is that love still real? In the West, where a handful of grain can mean life or death, sometimes love is sold, not because it's gone, but because poverty leaves no other choice. Like the story of Caleb and Ruth, 2 people who loved in hunger and ended that love with a deal the town never forgot. Caleb was the youngest son of a barley farming family in western Montana's dry lands. They had land, oxen, but lacked water most. When drought stretched into its 3rd year, crops failed, and Caleb's parents died of exhaustion and despair. He was left with a cracked field, 2 bony oxen, and a collapsing house. But he had Ruth. She was the only one who helped him haul water, carry straw, rouse him when he lay defeated by fatigue and hopelessness. They loved each other through glances, amid hay piles, through handholds as cold wind whipped their backs. They didn't talk much of the future. Both knew this place promised nothing. Ruth was the daughter of the local loan shark. Her father despised Caleb, called him a penniless boy, not worth a leaky roof. But Ruth believed differently. She thought Caleb could revive the land, grow barley, make bread from crops yet to come. They lived together in a 3-walled wooden house, the 4th blown away by a storm, unrepaired. Each morning, Caleb went to the field. Each evening, Ruth dried his soaked boots. No wedding ring, no engagement. But every night, they lay together like a lifelong married couple. Then came the great drought. Everything withered. Caleb sold both oxen for drinking water. Ruth stayed. She sold her hair, sewed for hire, even sold the old wedding shoes her mother left. But one day, the mill owner said, "I've got 3 sacks of surplus grain. Want them?" Caleb asked. "What's the price?" The man looked out the window, where Ruth was bent, watering plants, and said, "One night with her." Caleb said nothing, didn't rage, didn't refuse, just stayed silent. That night, when Ruth returned, 3 sacks of grain sat on the table. She didn't ask, but seeing Caleb's eyes, she knew, and she stayed silent too. They ate dinner, the first real bread in 6 months. No one spoke of what happened, but that night, they didn't share a bed. The next morning, Ruth left, took nothing but an old dress and bare feet. Caleb didn't stop her, just watched, hands still dusted with flour. She looked back once. You could say it was for me, but it was really so you wouldn't starve. Then she was gone. No one saw her in the area again. Caleb lived on, alone. Each season, he planted a bit more. Each year, the house grew sturdier. But he never ate bread from those 3 sacks. He left them in the shed, molding, rotting, like proof of the price he paid to survive a few more seasons, without someone to share them with. Someone asked, "If you could choose again?" He said, "I wouldn't sell her, but I'd still take the grain." The answer made people hate him, pity him, then fall silent, knowing in the West, hunger can kill, even conscience. Years later, at a late-season market, a woman sold pastries by the roadside, grey hair, sunken eyes, but a voice strangely familiar. Caleb approached, looked closely. Ruth looked back, didn't smile, just handed him a piece of bread, not to eat, to remember the grain you chose over me. He took it, didn't pay. She didn't ask. They said no more. But as he turned away, she called, "Next time you're hungry, eat your heart first." In the West, some loves don't die by guns or betrayal. They dissolve layer by layer, like moldy bread, like grain rotting in a shed. No one dares touch. And sometimes, people don't kill each other. They kill the last scraps of love, just to survive another season. Caleb lived. Ruth did too. But their love, that part once warm as a coal fire at night, was traded for 3 sacks of grain. No one ate it. No one dared touch it. But both remembered, because love once sold can never be bought back. And if someone still tries to buy back lost love, what they get are only jagged, bleeding fragments. In the West, loving is hard, but marrying is harder. Some marry to escape, some to fend off loneliness, some to fill a void, only to be abandoned, forgotten, or discarded, like expired goods. Like the girl named Willa, who married 3 times, but was left 4. Willa wasn't a weak woman, born in the dusty redlands of Utah, where girls learned to ride horses before knitting. She was tall, with sun-bleached blonde hair, scarred hands, and a tattooed bird's nest on her back, its meaning a mystery. At 17, she married first, a hunter named Hoyt, 15 years older, reeking of tobacco and muttering in his sleep. They lived together 8 months. One morning, Hoyt went out to trap foxes and never returned. Some said a bear got him. Others said he fled debts. She didn't search, just burned his clothes and took down their wedding photo. Her second marriage, 3 years later, was to a soft-spoken schoolteacher, new to town, clean-shaven, with the smell of books. They fell in love reading poetry in the backyard. Married less than a year, he took her dowry and vanished. This time, she laughed. Didn't cry, just hung a sign outside her house. A teacher who can't keep his word should be fired from life's classroom. The whole town read it, and no one spoke his name again. Her third marriage, she initiated. A widowed lumberjack with 3 kids. She didn't love him, but she loved his children. Believed she could turn a sad house into one with laughter. They lived together 4 years. Then one day, he said, "I still haven't forgotten my first wife." She nodded, slipped off her ring, packed her things, hugged each child, and left. No lawsuits, no anger, just a note. "It's fine. I haven't forgotten who I was before I knew love." But the fourth wasn't a husband. He was a passerby. No marriage, no promises. They met in a saloon, shared a whiskey, and slept together 3 nights. On the 4th morning, he was gone. No name, no word, yet Willa called it her most painful abandonment. Because for the first time, she wasn't betrayed, just forgotten. No one lied, no one promised. But she fell into an unfamiliar void, and for the first time, she cried. After that, Willa lived alone. No one in town dared court her, fearing they'd be the next husband left. She opened a shop, mending clothes, cutting hair for retired soldiers, and writing letters for the illiterate. But anyone entering her home saw on a small wooden shelf 3 rings in glass jars and a loosely tied cloth, the only thing she kept from the 4th man. No one dared ask. But elders said, once a year, on a full moon, she lined up those 4 items, sat across, and read poetry to shadows that no longer listened. Once, a young woman asked Willa to write a love letter. After hearing it, Willa paused, then said, "Don't put your name in a love letter unless you're ready to write it again after being left." The girl didn't send the letter, but returned 2 months later, asking Willa to write a rejection to a proposal. Perhaps that was the first time Willa saved a heart by keeping it from being given away. At the end of her life, Willa married no more. When she died, 4 notes were found in her pocket, each with one line: "I forgive you for not coming back. I forgive you for taking the money. I forgive you for still loving her. I forgive you for not having time to say anything." All signed Willa. They buried her at the cemetery's edge. No official family. But the next morning, someone placed 4 dried flowers on her grave, each tied with a small ribbon. No one knew who left them, but all believed Willa didn't die with a broken heart. She died with a heart pieced back together by what was once taken. In the West, where being abandoned scares people more than being shot, Willa was a woman who married 3 times, was left 4 times, but never gave up on herself. And in a place of dust, blood, and empty vows, that was a love rarer than fidelity. But there's an even rarer love, one that asks nothing, doesn't expect to be kept, doesn't need to be named. A love that exists only for one evening, because both know tomorrow one will die. That's the story of Jonah, a gunslinger wanted in 3 states, who robbed 3 banks, killed 2 sheriffs, and never drew his gun with a trembling hand. A $500 bounty was on his head, enough for even drinking buddies to start tracking him. When caught, he was reading in an old barn near the border. No resistance, no denial, just looked up and said, "You finally found me." They took him to Dry Hollow, to be shot at dawn. The town buzzed. Executions were rare occasions for Westerners to gather, bet on whether he'd cry, and debate deserving deaths. But no one knew that the night before, someone visited him. Her name was Eliza, the old library keeper, living alone in a tin-roofed house. They'd met 3 years earlier, on a rainy afternoon, when Jonah came to borrow a book. No one expected a gunslinger to ask for Poe's short stories. She gave him a worn copy, saying, "Return it, or don't. I remember your face." And he did return it, 2 weeks later, with a dried daisy and a note. "I kill men, but I've never stolen words." They didn't meet again, until that final night. Eliza appeared at the jail. No one stopped her, who'd fear a librarian. She asked for half an hour, stepped in. Jonah was staring at the ceiling. She brought no book, no letter, just stood, then sat across from him. "Are you scared?" "No, but I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" "For never kissing you. There's still time." And they kissed. Not rushed, not rough, not like lovers desperate before parting, but as if both had waited too long for that moment, and if the world ended now, it'd be fine. She didn't ask why he came to the library that day. He didn't ask why she came tonight. They both knew no one came just to read, and no one came just to say goodbye. After the kiss, they said no more. Eliza stood, placed her hand on his chest. "This won't get shot, but this might disappear." Then she left, didn't look back. The next morning, as he was led to the gallows, a light rain fell. Someone asked, "Last words?" He said, "I borrowed a book." and paid it back. They didn't understand, but Eliza did. She didn't watch, but when the gunshot rang, she closed her book, blew out the oil lamp, and sat in the dark all night. The next day, they buried Jonah behind the church cemetery, no name carved. But on his grave was a dried daisy, pressed between 2 pages. Poe's Short Stories, Old Edition. No one saw Eliza leave town, nor appear again after. Some said she went south to a convent. Others said she burned herself out of guilt. But really, she just moved elsewhere, opened a small library, still lent books, never recorded borrowers' names. A girl once asked, "Have you ever loved?" She smiled. "Yes, once. For half an hour." The girl's eyes widened. "Is half an hour's love real love?" She replied, "Yes, because it's more than many who love a lifetime, but never dare kiss." She didn't explain further, but from then on, the girl stayed quiet when opening books, as if respecting something buried in the lines. In the West, death is common, but a death with a kiss, that's rare. And if someone loves knowing the other will die at dawn, yet still dares to kiss, to give themselves to a moment without promises, that love touches an eternity, others never reach. Eliza and Jonah, not a couple, nothing to outsiders. But in that rainy night, in a cell about to become a farewell, they were everything, and that was enough. Enough to prove that a moment, if deep and true, can outlast death, outlast what people can hold. But some loves don't get to pause, not because they don't want to, but because the world gives no chance. Like a train with no final stop, just running forward, carrying 2 people who know they can't step off together. That's the love on a train that doesn't stop. The Denver, El Paso train ran once a week, not an express, not a freight, but a strange half-trade, half-passenger train, full of dust, creaking, and the smell of cowhide mixed with unwashed human sweat. But on that train, one September day, 2 people sat across from each other. Her name was Maybelle, a fabric peddler, hands gloved, never removing her hat, even in a closed car. His name was Thomas, a cargo loader, with a long scar on his wrist, and a small notebook always tucked in his chest pocket. They didn't know each other, didn't talk, but the train derailed briefly at a small border station, and they both stepped off to wait. They spoke first by a water cart. She asked, "Do you take this route often?" He replied, "No, but if you do, I could get used to it." She laughed, and it began. The train was fixed in an hour, but they walked around the station the whole time, not knowing what they were stepping into, but neither wanting to go back. Talked about sunflower seed cakes in Kansas, hot Texas winds, and the feeling of having no real home. He showed her his notebook, full of poems. She read, returned it, didn't praise, just said, "Keep writing, don't stop." He didn't dare ask if she liked them, but from then on, when the train jolted, he leaned lightly on her shoulder, as if afraid of losing balance, or just wanting to be close. The train reached El Paso at midnight. She got off, so did he. But she headed south. He had to catch a northbound train. They paused in the station's dim yellow light, among silent shadows. He asked, "Will you ever take the Denver route again?" She looked at him long, then said, "That train's one way, and I can't turn back." He didn't hold her back, just gave her his notebook. No copy kept. She took it, and left. 7 months later, Thomas rode the same train, same car, same seat. No Maybelle. The route became his habit. Monthly, same seat, rereading poems, now just memories. Then one day, a conductor handed him a small package. No sender's name, just seat 11, left window. He opened it. His notebook, recopied in another's hand, clean, clear, and at the end, a new poem, titled Train Without a Stop. Short lines. "I stepped off at my own station. No sign, no light. But if you ever wondered if you were loved, the answer is yes." Thomas didn't cry, but that day, he didn't get off at the last stop. He stayed on, as the train looped back, not to find her, but to know love doesn't need a destination, just that you boarded the right train, at the right time, and sat by the right person. Years later, some spoke of an old man, living near the tracks, reading poetry on his porch each evening. Passers-by saw him flip through a worn notebook, looking up at passing trains, as if waiting, but never standing to wave. A child asked, "Who are you waiting for?" He said, "No one. I just want to be sure I don't miss anything again." And so, the old man by the porch, the train still running, the love never stopping. In the West, not everyone marries, not everyone dies for each other, but some, just one journey, one conversation, one moment sitting close, write a love story, no ending needed, no promises, just knowing, sometimes, someone boards a train just to let their heart remember how to beat right, and that's enough to live on, though the train never returns to the old station, enough to know your heart once stirred, though the other was just a quiet passenger in a too short life. But for some, a heart isn't just something to carry, it's something to leave behind. If you're sure something beautiful was once there, like how Annie left her heart at a temporary stop where she stayed just one night, but left the most vital part of herself and never came back to claim it. Annie was a traveling singer, following cross-state trains to perform in small saloons along the route. At every stop, her voice rang under rotting wooden ceilings, beside cheap whiskey, ending with sparse applause from lonely men. She never stayed anywhere over 3 days. "I don't belong anywhere," she'd say. "I sing, then go, like a song without a chorus." Then, a train got stuck in snow at a small town called Falling Rock, a temporary stop, no decent inn, no theater, just a ramshackle saloon where men were drunk by 3 p.m. She planned to stay one night, then catch a sled back to the main road. But that evening, as she sang in the near-empty saloon, she saw him, a man in the corner, not drinking, not smoking, just staring at her old guitar. His name was Luke, a sign painter, living alone, no kin. He came to the saloon, not for whiskey, but to hear a real voice, rare in a land of wind and train whistles. They talked after her third song. She said, "I'm only here one night," he replied. "I don't need you to stay. I just need to know you came." The words made her laugh, then fall silent. That night, they didn't part. She didn't sleep with him, but sat close, sharing dry bread and fragmented memories. He spoke of his mother, who played mandolin, his first painted sign, and his fear of loneliness in a place where streetlights were scarcer than stars. The next morning, the snow half melted. She could leave. He didn't ask. She didn't speak. But before leaving town, she left her old guitar at his door. A note read, "I'll keep singing, but now I carry my voice, not my instrument. This is for the only one who saw me without needing me to sing." Then she left. No goodbye, no promise to meet again. Luke kept the guitar, set it by his window, didn't play, he couldn't, but wiped it daily, like tending an unhealing wound. Townsfolk called his house the singing house, though no sound came from it. A child once asked, "Who was she to you?" He said, "Nothing, just someone who brought her heart and left." Annie kept singing, but not like before. Every song after carried a faint sting at the end, as if each note recalled what she tried to forget. Once, she refused to perform, said, "This place isn't quiet enough to remember." No one understood, but from then on, she only sang where windows faced mountains, and never carried a guitar again. Years later, she returned to Falling Rock, not to find Luke. Her train was rerouted. She stepped onto the rotting platform and saw a new sign, "Welcome to Falling Rock," where a song was never finished. She laughed, then cried. For the first time in years, she visited the old saloon. No one recognized her, but her guitar, worn, discolored, hung by the door, under a carved sign, "From the one who left her heart." She didn't ask who hung it, didn't ask if Luke was alive or gone, just touched the strings, then turned away, carrying a smile sadder than an unfinished song. That night, as the train left, someone saw her sing softly, her voice dissolving into the wind like a goodbye no one heard clearly. In the West, people leave behind guns, horses, or debts, but leaving a heart and not returning for it. That's something few dare. Annie did. Luke kept it like the only warmth in a lifelong winter, and at a temporary stop, where no one expected anything worth remembering, they had one night, enough to call it love. And so, though trains keep running, though people leave, that heart stayed in a wooden house, by an unplayed guitar, and in the words of an old sign painter, "I never married, but I lived with a song." A wordless song, no chorus, no ending. Some don't even have a song, just a face on a wanted poster, tacked up at the post office, a name crossed out in blood-red ink, and a warning, "Dangerous, do not approach." In the West, Some loves begin, not with a glance, but with the flicker of a paper burned after reading. Like the love between Rachel and the man the whole country was hunting. Rachel lived in Banyan Creek, running a small tailor shop that doubled as a post office. She wasn't strikingly beautiful, didn't smile much, but everyone liked her for her discretion, honesty, and lack of prying questions. Each week, she pinned unclaimed letters, crop notices, and occasionally new wanted posters from the federal courthouse to the bulletin board. One autumn morning, opening a mailbag from the stagecoach, she found a peculiar sheet. Wanted, William Jude, for murder, bank robbery, prison escape, reward $800 alive, $400 dead. The face was blurry, indistinct, showing only sharp eyes, a scar by the lip, and a handwritten note. Skilled at disguise, often uses aliases. She pinned the poster as usual, but that evening, as she tidied her shop, a man walked in, asking to mend a torn coat pocket. He was polite, quiet, paid with a coin up front. She sewed. He waited, and when she looked up, she saw those eyes, unmistakable. No one else in the area had that look, both wary and weary, like he'd been running his whole life. They said nothing. She didn't ask his name. He didn't mention the poster. But that night, she took the paper down from the board, burned it, silently, like burning a part of her life, before it could happen. From then on, he came back often. Any excuse sufficed: mending clothes, buying thread, asking about parcels. Each time he sat quietly. Each time he looked at her like he was memorizing her features, in case he had to flee. She didn't ask. "Who are you?" She just brought tea and added a blanket to the chair he favored. The first night they slept together, it rained. No rush, no fear, just two people knowing time was short, so they used it right. He said his real name, once. She kissed the scar by his lip and whispered, "Whoever you are, you're trembling like a man." He laughed and cried. For the first time in years, 3 months passed. Winter came. She knew he'd leave. He knew too, but neither spoke of it, until a federal marshal came to town with a new wanted poster. Clearer image, higher reward. They stopped by Rachel's shop, asking about strangers. She shook her head, but when the marshal left, he was standing behind the curtain. "You could turn me in. Get the money. Stone would thank you. I don't need money, and the town never helped me thread a needle. I don't want you dragged into this. Then don't get caught." That night, he left. No promise to return. No goodbye hug. Just his coat, a cold kiss, and a small note. "If I live, you're the reason." Rachel kept everything. The cup he drank from, a scratch on the wooden table, an empty bullet pouch. She told no one, but anyone who saw her after knew. She'd loved the man the world called a criminal. To her, he was the first to wait without rushing, the first to touch her hand without demanding, the only one to leave her with a longing greater than her fear. Years later, rumors said William Jude died, shot in New Mexico. No confirmation, but one spring morning, Rachel received a parcel, no sender's name. Inside was a notebook of clumsy poems and a carefully mended cloth patch, embroidered in small red thread. "This is the tear I once carried, and you stitched it." She folded the notebook, set it on the table, and brewed tea. She lived 30 more years, never married, he never explained. But each year, she sewed a torn coat pocket, like a ritual for the man who left nothing but memories, and a love once printed on a wanted poster. In the West, sometimes people love a name crossed in red, a smudged photo, a story half told. But love doesn't need to be clean, it just needs to be real. And Rachel, the woman who burned a wanted poster at midnight, loved in a way only those who've gambled their whole life understand, loving without holding, just hoping the other still lives, to know you were once called by a look, not a bounty. But not everyone is lucky enough to keep such a look. In the West, some women no longer trust glances, promises, or even the name of the man beside them. They don't love anymore, don't dream. They just need a body heavy enough to keep an empty bed warm each night. And those men, chosen not for their hearts but for their heat, come and go like winter firewood, leaving nothing but a dent in the straw mattress and a faint gunpowder smell on the pillow. Hattie lived in the hills south of Santa Fe, in a creaky wooden house with 3 locks, but only one bolt that worked. She'd loved once, believed, waited. But after the last man left her with a newborn and a gun that wouldn't fire, Hattie stopped loving. She raised her son, sold jam at market, worked weekends at the stagecoach stop. But at night, when things grew colder, quieter, more dangerous, Hattie began inviting men over, not to love, to sleep. Literally, "What do you want?" she asked, each time someone knocked. "To sleep with you. Just sleep." "Yeah. Then take off your boots, hang your gun, and don't dare call another's name." No one stayed past 2 nights. No one was asked if they'd return. They came, lay beside her, warmed each other in silence. Some shivered like fever victims. Some tried touching her shoulder, but were pushed away. Some left in the night, realizing they couldn't say, "You're beautiful." Hattie didn't stop anyone from taking memories, but kept no keepsakes. Except a small notebook, listing each man who'd lain in that bed, with one word beside their name, warm or cold. Her son Eli didn't ask questions. He knew his mother was different, knew he had no father, knew strange footsteps crossed the porch nightly. Once he asked, "Why not pick one and keep him?" Hattie said, "Because I don't need someone to stay. I need someone who knows when to leave." Eli nodded. From then on, he took up stoking the fire each night, so his mother wouldn't need others to keep warm. But Hattie continued, not for lack of human touch, but because it was the only way she felt she hadn't fully turned to stone. Once, a young man, new from the east, smelling of fine tobacco, hands still soft, told her, "I want to stay, not to sleep with you, just to be near." Hattie paused, then said, "Then get out. Here, if you can't warm the bed, you don't belong." He left, but the next morning, she wrote his name in the notebook. For the first time, not warm or cold, but cool. On especially cold nights, she sat on the porch, watching the moon. No tears, no songs, just sat, warming a teacup in her hands, like she was waiting for someone who'd never come, not to sleep, but to ask if the bed was cold that night. But no one asked, and she stopped expecting. Then came a brutal winter, when Eli fell gravely ill and snow blocked the roads. Hattie stayed by him 3 days, sleepless. She invited no one knocked. She placed her hand on his forehead, then her chest, cold. For the first time she was scared, not for lack of men, but for lack of real warmth. Warmth that didn't need a shared bed, warmth that wiped brows, cooked porridge, sat silent, as wind whistled through door cracks. Eli recovered. But that night, Hattie didn't sleep. She opened the notebook, read each name. Some were surely dead, some wouldn't recall passing through, some she couldn't picture, and she knew she hadn't loved again, hadn't given anyone a chance, and maybe hadn't given herself one either. The next morning, she remade the bed, washed the blankets, burned the notebook. For the first time in years, she opened the door before dawn. When Eli asked, "Are you waiting for someone?" she said, "No, but if someone comes, I'll ask their name," and smiled. In the West, no one blames a woman for using men like firewood. They blame her when she lets herself burn out without seeking water. Hattie had been ash, had been stone, but when she started remembering names, not temperatures, her heart began to thaw. And so, the men who warmed her bed, coming and going, taking nothing, left something they didn't know. They helped a woman who'd lost all faith, realize that, without love, there could still be hope. And sometimes, hope is the only thing keeping a bed from being utterly cold. But some don't even have a bed to grow cold, no one to call in the night, no past to recall or future to hope for. They live on the West's fringes, like dust, like stone, like cracks in a dried-up well's surface. And sometimes, in the briefest moment, in a place with nothing left to hold, they leave one thing, a kiss, as if their life once knew how to stir, even just once. Like the story of a nameless woman and a kiss by a dry well. The dry well sat at the edge of Red Hollow's desert, a land unclaimed, with no stagecoach stop, no signpost. They say it was once a rest for migrant caravans, but after years of drought, the water vanished, and so did the people. Only the well remained, desolate, its bricks crumbling, its mouth filled with sand and dried moss. No one came near, except one woman, graying hair, brown cloak, living in a shack of rusted tin and salvaged windows. No one knew her name. Children called her the hag by the well. Adults avoided her, as if she carried bad luck. But one young man, Daniel, visited often. Daniel dug graves for the nearby town. Quiet, reserved, he preferred books to talk. He said the only place quiet enough to read was by the dry well. From his first time reading there, he saw her silently brewing tea, offering a cup, then sitting across, saying nothing. From then on, once a week, he brought a book, and they read, neither bothering the other. Sometimes, she'd say, that line's good, or, this author doesn't believe in love. Sometimes, she asked, have you ever kissed anyone? Daniel blushed, not yet, but I think I'd know how. She smiled, good, because a kiss doesn't need learning, just daring. That June, a great drought hit the town. People left. Daniel stayed. He had no kin. The only person he cared for was the woman by the well. One day, when he arrived, she didn't greet him. Her shack was shut. He called. No answer. He waited all afternoon. At sunset, she appeared, pale, breathing weakly. He rushed over, helped her sit by the well's edge. She said, you know, I loved someone once. We planned to live here, by the well, plant trees, raise horses, but he died before we built the first house. I stayed, thinking if I left, I'd forget him. Daniel held her hand. For the first time, dry, cold, but trembling, like a heart, waking from a long sleep. She looked at him. Would you give someone your first kiss? He didn't answer, just leaned down, gently touching his lips to her forehead. But she pulled him closer, and they kissed. Not clumsy, not rushed, not like the young, but as if both knew there'd be no second time. When they parted, she smiled. Now you know, and I've had my last kiss. Then she closed her eyes, fell asleep. He stayed all night, still holding her hand, head resting on the long dry well's edge. The next morning, she didn't wake. Daniel didn't call for help. He dug her grave, by the well. No headstone, no name, just a stone with the words, the well's keeper, and a kiss's keeper. From then on, Daniel stopped digging graves. He stayed, tending the well, planted wildflowers around it, rebuilt the shack. When asked, he said, I'm guarding the most beautiful thing in my life. Each year, on a full moon summer night, he lit an oil lamp, set a cup of tea by the well, and read poetry. Once, a passerby heard him murmur, this dry well is where I learned to live. Townsfolk began sharing the kiss by the dry well story. Some called Daniel mad, others admired him, but no one denied. Since then, the well stopped being feared. It became a place where people left flowers, sat quietly, and whispered to those they'd loved, but hadn't said enough to. Daniel didn't stop them, but he always asked, are you here to forget or remember? If they said remember, he offered tea. If forget, he pointed to the desert. The sand will hold that. In the West, love is often traded for blood, tears, or death. But sometimes, it's just a kiss, by a dry well, between two people, not of the same time, age, or future. And that's why it endures, unbound, unconfirmed. It only needed to happen once, for someone like Daniel to hold it in his heart forever, like a smoldering flame, just enough to not be forgotten, but never to burn out. And if anyone asked, who did you love? He'd say, a woman with no name, but with a kiss. And sometimes, that's enough for a lifetime. But for some, a kiss isn't enough. A touch of hands isn't enough. A brief romance can't replace a lasting presence, so they stay by the side of the departed, not because they can't let go, but because they believe love means staying, whether the other is alive or dead. Like the woman who camped 17 years by her lover's grave, through winters, storms, and whispers from the town beyond the hill. Her name was Miriam, once an embroiderer in the East, with large eyes, a small mouth, and a voice soft as silk lining a wedding dress. She met Thomas in 1869, a federal mail coach driver who stopped at the fabric shop where she worked, asking for needles, thread, and cold water. They didn't fall in love at first sight, but by the 12th glance, Miriam noticed each time Thomas entered, the world outside paused for a second. He spoke little, asking after her mother's health, an unfinished dress, always wishing her sleep well, a wish no one had given her before. 2 years later, they were engaged, not married. Thomas said, I want to take you somewhere with not just wedding flowers, but crops, land, and children's laughter. They left the city for the west, settling near red rock cliffs, with a small stream and a meadow just wide enough to camp. They lived in a tent, half-built a wooden house when winter came. Thomas said, "Come spring, I'll build again, a house strong enough that wind can't steal your songs." But spring never came. A horse slipping on a cliff took Thomas away mid-March. Miriam dug his grave on the land they'd chosen for their home, by the first pine they'd rested under. No family, no priest, just a song she sang, voice trembling but unbroken. After, she didn't leave, didn't return east, didn't write anyone. She rebuilt the camp by his grave and lived there, day after day. Townsfolk called her the mad woman on the hill. They sent food, offered to take her to a place with beds, with people. She refused. Each morning, she cleaned the grave, picked up leaves, talked as if Thomas were there. Each night, she read poetry, alone, or embroidered cloths with "If you were alive, I'd still love you." 5 years later, officials proposed moving the grave for a logging road. She fought, alone, wrote letters, went door to door for signatures. The road was rerouted around her land. She didn't win, but she didn't lose, and that was enough. Once, a city reporter came to write about the West's most faithful woman. She said one line, "Don't write my name, write his. I'm just camping," then shut her tent. Time passed. Her hair grayed, her hands shook, but she stayed, replaced the tent with tin roofing, built a small stove, learned to grow vegetables, fenced the grave. When asked, "What are you still waiting for?" she said, "I'm not waiting. I just haven't wanted to leave." By year 14, she built a stone bench by the grave, carved, "For those who want to sit with someone no longer here." Passers-by began stopping, left flowers, sat quietly. No one made noise. No one called it madness anymore. They understood. Some loves need no proof, just existence. On the 17th winter, Miriam stopped opening her tent. Townsfolk found her dead, on the stone bench, holding an unfinished embroidered notebook. They buried her beside Thomas, under the same old pine, on her stone. They carved. She didn't build a house, but built an eternal home. Since then, that small plot became a place many visited, not to mourn, but to sit silently. Everyone left something, an embroidered cloth, a handwritten note, a small flower. Some said, "I'm camping by a grave of someone not yet dead." Others wrote, "I'm still here, though you forgot my name." But all knew they came not for Thomas, but for Miriam. For a woman who believed love didn't mean holding, but staying long enough that no one forgot a love once lived there. In the West, the land is barren, the wind cruel, and death comes faster than harvests. But if someone dares pitch a tent by a grave for 17 years, through loneliness, gossip, and forgetting, they're not mad. They're braver than all who abandoned their loves before they were even gone. But not everyone is brave enough to stay. Some must choose, love or live, keep a promise or keep breathing. And sometimes, loving someone doesn't mean forgiving all they've done. That's Clara's case. The woman who loved Arizona's most wanted robber, lived with him 3 months, and turned him in herself. Her story split the town. Half called her a traitor, half a survivor. Clara was a singer at El Coyote Saloon, where everything was dim, from oil lamps to laws. She sang nightly, poured whiskey mornings, fought when touched too much. Clara wasn't gentle or dreamy. She'd been burned once by an ex-husband who took all her savings. Since then, her rule: no one touches my heart without keeping their word. But then he walked in. His name was Reeve, tall, black hair, eyes bright as a knife slash in the dark. He drank little, didn't brawl, just sat and listened to her sing. One night he stepped on stage, slipped her a folded paper. No money, no invitation, just a handwritten compliment. "You sing like you know you'll be forgotten, but sing anyway." She didn't smile, but folded it, tucked it in her dress. That was the start. Reeve returned the next night, and the next. They spoke to no one else, just looked. On the 7th night, Clara pulled him into the back room, kissed him before asking his name. "I don't need to know who you are, but if you stay, don't vanish like an unfinished poem." He stayed. 3 months. They lived like an unwed couple.
Hey, he fixed the saloon's roof.
She taught him neat handwriting. She didn't ask where he came from. He didn't ask how she'd been hurt. Mornings, he left. Evenings, he returned with wildflowers tucked behind her ear. But one day, Clara overheard two outlaws, Reeve, the bank robber, who burned 3 stagecoaches, killed a sheriff, hiding somewhere, $1,000 for his head. She smirked. $1,000 was the price of the man beside her these past 3 months. Clara went to their room, watched Reeve sleep. His hand rested on her chest, like he feared nothing in the world. She didn't wake him. But the next morning, she went to the sheriff's office, walked in, said plain, Reeve, or whatever name he uses, is in room 3 at El Coyote. He won't run. He trusts me. The sheriff came that night. Reeve didn't resist. As they cuffed him, he looked at her, not with hate, not with blame, just sadness. When did you know? She asked. When you stopped singing the old song, you started singing like you were counting days. I'm sorry, don't be. You did right. You chose to live. At trial, Reeve was sentenced to hang. Before execution day, he sent Clara a letter, written in the neat hand she'd taught. You were the last kind thing I had. I don't blame you, but if there's a next life, don't turn me in so soon. Let me love you a few more weeks. Clara didn't cry at the hanging, but that night, she didn't sleep. She sang the old song, the one he first heard. No one clapped. But when she finished, a patron left a small wildflower on her table, identical to those Reeve used to pick. She never left El Coyote. But from then on, she let no one touch her. Not from fear of love, but because no one else looked at her the way he had, without demanding, without defining. Just, you are you, and that's enough. Some called Clara a betrayer, others called her brave. But those who've loved a dangerous man know love is a choice. But living without being shot, without being dragged into sin, is a choice too. Clara chose, not for money, not for revenge, but because her heart knew real love isn't just holding on, but sometimes letting go at the right time. In the West, the law is slow, but bullets are fast. Loving a wanted man is standing in a gun's muzzle. Clara didn't wait to be shot. She stepped aside, turned him in, and locked her heart's door forever. But deep down each night, singing the old song, she faced east, where the sun rises, and where she believed someone once loved her, with all he had left, before he was taken away. But sometimes, people don't wait for the law to take their love. They do it themselves, end it themselves, tie the noose themselves, and then learn to live with that person's shadow every night, without tears, without telling, without forgiveness. In the West, some loves die by a stranger's hand, and some by the hands of the one who loved most, like the story of Jonah and Mabel, where the noose wasn't a sentence, but a promise broken beyond repair. Mabel was a preacher's daughter in the parched lands of North Texas, where the Bible was read louder than proposals, and honor was measured by the firmness of a handshake. She wasn't like other girls, tall, sun-browned, a better shot than her father, speaking with eyes that had seen death but never admitted fear. Jonah was the only man in town who dared tease her. Once a soldier, now a cattle driver, he carried in his eyes something like ash. They loved against the community's disapproval. He didn't pray, didn't attend church, didn't wear white shirts, but Mabel loved him, not to defy her father, but because Jonah had a quietness she found nowhere else. Sleeping beside him, she no longer heard sermons in her head, just heartbeats and porch wind. But then the robberies began. Male coaches attacked, gunfire at night, hoofprints matching Jonah's saddle. No one said it outright, but all eyes turned to Mabel. Her father called her aside, handed her a gun, and said, "If you know who's doing this, and still lie beside him nightly, the sin isn't his alone." She stayed silent, but that night, as Jonah slept, she searched his saddle, found money, a map, 2 blood-stained cloths. The next morning, she didn't cook breakfast, didn't go to the fields, just sat on a wooden chair, staring at Jonah. "Did you do it?" He didn't deny, didn't apologize, just said, "Mabel, I killed men in uniform, got patted on the back. Now I rob those richer than my blood. You think that's wrong?" She didn't answer, just went to the barn, took a cattle hanging rope, tied it to the oak behind the house. When he stepped out, he saw her under the tree, eyes red, gun in hand. "Jonah," she said, "I love you, but I can't let you drag me down further." He nodded, took off his hat, stepped onto the chair, didn't resist. "Do it if you think it'll keep you clean." She trembled, but pulled the trigger. The chair fell. His body hung. She didn't scream, didn't cry, just stood, like the old oak, watching until dark. She buried him by the house. No guests, no name. On the stone she carved the man I loved, the man I killed. After she told no one, didn't explain, just lived on, quietly. In the wooden house, working fields by day, lighting an oil lamp and reading his books by night. Townsfolk spread tales. Some said she went mad, others said Jonah deserved it. But those who saw Mabel's eyes passing the cemetery knew she wasn't mad. She was more lucid than anyone. And that's why the tragedy happened. Each year, on the hanging's anniversary, she hung the old rope back on the tree, let no one use it, just left it there. A reminder that some things hang heavier in the heart than a body on a branch. Once, a boy asked, "Do you regret it?" She said, "Regret's a soft word. What I carry has no name." The boy didn't ask again. From then on, no one played near the oak behind Mabel's house. It became the town's quietest place. Mabel lived to 70. When she died, they found a small notebook by her bed, filled with unsent letters. "Jonah, if you were alive, I'd shoot your hand, not your neck, so you'd still hurt, but could hold me when I shook. But I didn't, because I didn't know forgiveness. I only knew endings." They buried her beside Jonah, 3 steps apart, on her grave. No one carved anything. But those who knew the story, passing by, whispered, "The girl who hanged the man she loved, and loved him till the end." In the West, where laws can bend, where love often comes with blood, some choices have no right or wrong, only loss. And Mabel, the woman who pulled the trigger with shaking hands and a shattered heart, is the most painful reminder. Sometimes, killing someone is the only way to not lose yourself, but also the surest way to lose the rest of your life. Even so, not everyone lets their love die with the person they once loved. Some choose to keep it alive, not with photos, not with keepsakes, but by carving their names into stone. So if one day no one remembers, the cliff will. And if they themselves forget how deeply they loved, the wind, sun, and time will whisper it back. In a remote valley straddling Colorado and Utah, there's a cracked, towering cliff where a couple once carved their names, then left. No one knows who they were, but one girl traced those names her entire life. Her name was Ruth, born in a tiny town, no map bothered to mark, raised in her mother's dairy shop. She once believed love existed only in books, until she met Eli. He was a mail carrier, quiet, skilled at drawing, never late. Each morning he delivered letters to her mother, leaving a small mark on the envelopes. Not words, just a blue ink smudge, a spiral, or 3 dots. Only after Ruth collected 27 letters did she realize it was a code. "I like you." Their love wasn't like the books. No one proposed. But one day, Eli asked her to come away, saying only, "There's a place I want to carve my name, if you agree." She nodded, no questions. They rode horses through 3 miles of dust, climbed red rock ridges, and reached a high cliff, scoured by wind so bare no tree could grow. Eli carefully pulled out a small knife, carved their names, Eli and Ruth, circled with a lopsided heart. She asked, "What if you disappear one day?" He replied, "Come back here. If the names are still there, I'm somewhere thinking of you. What if they fade? Then carve them again." Weeks later, Eli stopped coming. No letters, no word. They said he was shot dead in a brawl at a western stagecoach stop. Nobody confirmed. But death in the West often came fast and silent as a stray bullet. Ruth didn't cry. She just returned to the cliff, saw their names still there, and went home. 10 years later, she married a kind man with fields, horses, and no knack for poetry. They lived quietly, had 2 children, but every year, on the day she and Eli carved their names, she left home for 2 days, telling no one, just said she was gathering herbs. She went to the cliff, dusted the carving, touched the letters, whispered, "I'm still here." You, once, her eldest daughter, secretly followed, saw Ruth at the cliff, calloused hands on the weathered letters, eyes closed like praying. Back home, the girl asked, "Does Pa know?" Ruth said, "No, but your father loves me differently." That man was a promise never kept. Years passed. The cliff was forgotten. Roads were built around it. The town grew, but Ruth kept going. When her husband died, she wore black for 3 months, then grey, and rode back to the cliff. One day, she brought the old knife Eli used and recarved the faded names. At the end of her life, Ruth wrote a diary, left for her granddaughter. It held no tales of her husband or children, only her cliff visits, short dialogues like dream shadows. I think you're dead. No, I'm just somewhere else, keeping your name any way I can. When Ruth died, her granddaughter found the cliff. The words Eli and Ruth stood, dry, cracked, but clear. She didn't know who Eli was, but understood some loves don't need a lifetime just to be carved into something unerasable. And if someone loved enough to return to the same spot, the same day, for half a century, that love needed no witnesses. That day, the granddaughter carved a small line below. Someone still read it. In the West, where winds erase whole villages, where stone wears down, some names never vanish. They're not carved by hand, but by heart. And if you've ever wandered among rocks, seen faded old words, maybe someone once stood there, hands trembling, fearing they'd forget how deeply they loved. And then, what you're touching isn't a carving, but a heart long stopped, still echoing. Because love, especially in the West, never dies gently. It's carved into stone, written on graves, whispered in the wind, and sometimes it burns, like dry grass in the desert. One dropped match is enough to torch everything. And if anyone asked, what does love in the West smell like? You could say, it smells of smoke and blood, because love here was never tame. It doesn't wear white wedding dresses, wait for diamond rings, or sing hymns. It's dirty, it stings, it hurts, and it's so real people would kill for it, die for it, or both. I met her in a fire, literally. She was throwing buckets of water to save a horse barn, hair dusted with ash, eyes red but hands steady. I was a firefighter, temporary, called up from the dry season watch crew. When I said, "Get out, it's about to blow," she looked at me, unfazed, like I was wind. "I've got 3 horses in there. Try stopping me. I'll break your spine." I didn't stop her. I grabbed a bucket. After the fire, we sat together, spitting ash, drinking well water, saying nothing. As I turned to my wagon, she said, "I'm Lou." I said, "Jack." She said, "I've never slept with a guy whose name's just 4 letters, but I could try." 3 weeks later, I moved into the old barn, fixed up as a bedroom. Lou didn't ask about my past. I didn't ask about the scars on her back. We didn't date, just worked together, ate together, slept together. No one said I love you. No one asked you okay this morning. But every night, I felt her lie close, heart pounding, like she'd just escaped, while I dreamed of places I'd left, where she wasn't. Lou was once a hired gun, shot better than any man I knew. She'd guarded gold caravans, got betrayed, shot twice in the back, survived by crawling into rotten hay. Since then, she hated gold, hated men in white shirts, hated the phrase, "You deserve love." She didn't need love, she needed trust, and that's what I gave. We lived like that through the dry season. Then one day, Lou's old crew found us. 3 men, armed, grudge-filled, said she betrayed them, owed blood. I stood by her as they yelled, "Choose him or choose life." Lou laughed. "I choose burning all 3 of you if you take one more step." I didn't draw before she fired. 3 shots, no misses. The wind hadn't even shifted. We had to leave after. Burned the camp, took the horses, headed southwest to a place no one named, with streams and shade. On the way, she asked, "Regret it?" I said, "Yeah, I should have shot with you." She laughed. First time in weeks, then kissed me. Not soft, not sweet, like biting the last living part of me. That night, we lay together. No roof, no pillows, just stars, and the hum of blood in our ears. Lou whispered, "If this is love, it's not what they say." I said, "I don't know what they say, but I know its smell." She nodded. "Smoke," I added, "and blood." We lived hidden for over a year, sometimes worked at stagecoach stops, sometimes cut stone at mines, sometimes wandered, eating hardtack, looking at each other to prove we were real. But the past didn't let go. One day, I was hunted for an old crime, a wildfire the year before, where I let the wind carry flames, short on men. They said I indirectly killed 3 people. I told Lou, "You can leave me. They won't take you. She said, "Don't insult me like that. If you die, I'll burn this place down." I was arrested. She followed, quietly. On trial day, she stood outside, fired 2 shots at the flagpole as a warning, then left, saying nothing. I was freed for lack of evidence. When I got out, she was gone. But on a wooden post near the stop, a fresh carving read, "If this is love, remember it by the burn." I searched for her. Took 2 months. Found her. New name. Working at a forge. Hands greasy. Eyes still like fire. I didn't ask, "Do you miss me?" I just stood there. She looked, tossed me a rag. "All right, let's go home." We didn't marry, had no kids, no fixed home. But even now, as I write this, hearing her grumble by the fire, I know, love doesn't need to be gentle, just real. If someone asked, of all the West stories, whores, robbers, kisses behind curtains, or hanging a lover, which is the truest love, I'd say, the one that could burn a history page, bleed hands, shoot men, and still choose to lie together after, saying nothing. Love in the West makes no promises, sends no invitations, dreams no white dreams, but it has something nowhere else does, survival. And if a love can survive smoke, blood, cruel winds, and daily death stalk, that love is real. As for me, I'm still here, with her, waking each morning to the faint gunpowder in her hair, knowing if anyone touches her, I'll shoot before asking. And if she dies before me, I won't carve her name on a grave. I'll carve it on my gun, because if this is love, it smells of smoke, blood, and her. The story, the shocking truth about love, in Wild West times, isn't just a journey through 32 jagged pieces of love in the Wild West. It's a raw mirror of how people today love, lose, and choose to forgive in modern America, where relationships are built on personal freedom and expectations of perfection. The story reminds us that true love doesn't come from roses, but from embracing each other's darkness, like how Lou and Jack survived together through gunfire and bounties, still choosing to return, though the world burned behind them. We see Mabel, who hanged her lover to not betray her conscience, and Ruth, who carved a name on a cliff for half a century, just to not forget a glance. In an era where loyalty is sometimes defined by scene-zoned or blocked on social media, their actions remind us love isn't always beautiful, but if it's real enough, it's worth keeping, whether by a carved word, a vow, or a bullet. In today's America, surrounded by speed, convenience, and disposable relationships, the story poses a haunting question. Do we dare love like those in the Old West, unguarded, uncalculating, ready for pain to truly touch someone's heart? Or are we just loving as society teaches, clean, safe, and free of smoke? If you've ever loved, lost, or carved someone's name, just to not forget, subscribe to join us in exploring love's never clean, but always true. Thank you for riding through this smoke and blood-filled West with us. See you in the next stories, where hearts always leave a mark, even if no one's left to tell.